ELTs, electronic locator transmitters, and related devices. We'll discuss those various types. We'll talk about how we can detect them when they're active. We'll describe how the direction finding equipment in the aircraft works. It's a combination of a sensor or a receiver and the antennas. You know, different aircraft of different vintages will have different receivers and also different antennas on the aircraft. And we'll discuss how we use the DF. You know, so what are the strategies you would use when doing an ELT search? And I know Ilya and I just did one not too long ago for practice, right?
Yes, we did.
So there's an initial, go ahead, go back. We'll talk about the different phases of the search, on what to do when you're getting close, what you'd expect as you pass over, what you need to be doing. Let's go to the next chart. There are different methods. We talk about homing, wing null. So what happens if your Becker is not working too well? You know, using the airband radio and those antennas, which are probably on a different side of the aircraft, and the oral and signal methods. Talk about signal reflection and interference. You know, what might it look like if it's coming from an aircraft that's in a hangar, or there's high voltage power lines nearby, or other things that can interfere and or reflect the signal. And then how to go ahead and silence that ELT. This is, you know, after, of course, you land, and similar to what the UDF team would do, and which you need to know because, again, you may not have a UDF team available to you. Okay, let's go to the next. All right, so what are these direction finding radios that we have, these receivers on our aircraft? Let's make this a little interactive. So I know most of you have been in one of our Cap aircraft, if not all. Well, all of you should have. You should all have a mission scanner, right? So what do you think is the most common one? It's not this one. What do you think is the most common arrangement of antenna?
The DF on the bottom, on the belly.
The bottom. They're going to be on the bottom, right? On this picture, you see the three little antennas there. Remember the old 206, Ilya? How they had the three antennas underneath? Those were the DF antennas. But what do we have, say, in 445 Charlie Papa or 183 Charlie Papa?
The Becker at the bottom? Or...
Yeah, you get that can on the bottom. I think it's the next. Is it the next slide?
It's not actually.
Okay, we don't have a picture of it. But I think
there is a picture later. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you got that can on the bottom, but the key point here is, you know, if you're using that built, you know, the add-on, I guess you could say, DF equipment, presumably a Becker. The antennas are generally, I don't think I've seen any with them on top. They're all going to be on the bottom of the plane. Now, when we talk about wing nulling and using the airband, you know, just like you can use a handheld receiver using airband radio tuned to 1215, those antennas are typically on the top. So something to consider when you're setting up to do your maneuvers to figure out which direction the signal is coming from. Okay, go to the next one. Guess now we're going to talk about all the different kinds of ELTs out there. They're not very strong signals. So ideally, they are line of sight. Ideally, you need to get closer to it to really hear it well, which is probably a good thing because if they've been going off, overnight, maybe for a couple days, they're not bothering as many people that way. But they are, when they're going off, they're cluttering up the frequency. They're preventing other people using the frequency in that area for other, voice comms and all of the airline traffic. They're all required to monitor 1215. So we're going to get reports. ELTs or related devices, EPIRBs, PLBs, they're not always going to be in an aircraft. It could be in a boat. It could be a hiker that has one that sets it off. And we're not going to play the sound. Or do you want to play the sound? You have to click on it. Great.
No, it doesn't actually come through.
Oh, it doesn't come through. Okay. Well, I think everyone's probably heard it before. If you haven't, I'm sure you can Google the sound. It is very annoying. So there's a good reason for the Air Force to send us out to go find them and turn them off because they are annoying and they clutter up the emergency frequency, the guard frequency that is needed for other uses. I believe the statistics are like 97% of them are not real emergencies. So, send out a cheap asset, us, to go find it and turn it off. And in the 3% of the cases, when it is a real emergency, we want to get out there quickly because there's a timeline, right, in finding and responding to a vehicle or person in distress.
And we don't know when we're launched, whether it's going to be or not. So we have to
We
treat it
have
as
no idea. We have to treat them all as they might be real emergencies. And also train like you fly, right? Train is in accordance to doing how you would do a real mission. So when you do the training flights, treat it the same way, so you're prepared.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Sure.
So the 97%, are they? Do we know if a large percentage comes from PLB or certain ELTs versus aircraft ELTs?
I haven't seen the numbers. I think there's still all more aircraft than not. In how are they activated? I think most of the times it's going to be something in maintenance. Although oftentimes it could be there was a bouncy landing and the ELT was kind of sensitive and it went off and the pilot didn't check that it had gone off and put the plane away, and 3 days later we get called. Sometimes that happens.
Right. Remember, there's a post-flight checklist item to make sure that the aircraft you just landed in is not transmitting its ELT.
Yep.
So,
Yeah. It's not
we don't
necessarily
wanna become
standard on everyone's checklist, but it is on the Capt checklist, and I have it on mine.
that's
so.
what I mean. It's the
Yeah.
checklist.
Yeah. So and I don't think we set them off that often. Sometimes they're on military bases, which can be interesting. We've gone by Travis a number of times and told them they had an ELT going off. Usually we don't prosecute those. They go and find it themselves. In any case, there's the three primary frequencies. You've got the 121.5, which is VHF. It's also used as the guard channel, so multi-use there. If the frequency is cluttered up by the emergency of the ELT signal, then really, at least in the area where it's going off, you can't hear anybody talking on there. So, and double that is the UHF or the military version of that. We of course don't have those frequencies on our airband, but I think most of the DF equipment can dial that in.
Yep.
Yeah, I think most of it can. And then the newer ones, the 406, and we'll get into that one, the 406 megahertz. It's actually, I think, 8 different frequencies all close together there, 406.025 and up from there. That works a little differently. It's also picked up by the SARSATs, and it has an encoded location and ownership information associated with it, or it's supposed to. So we don't prosecute those that often. Interesting thing about that is underlying the 406 signal, there's a corresponding, it's supposed to be a corresponding 1215 signal at a low power level. So sometimes we'll pick those up. So the journal types, we talked about in aircraft, in military, the marine ones, PLBs. There's also test stations, and we have practice beacons ourselves. They use a different frequency. Most of the newer ELTs, and it talked about activated by G-force. Most of the new ones can actually be activated by the pilot or the mechanic or whoever with a switch. And honestly, a lot of the ones I've found, they were turned on by someone as opposed to activated accidentally. So they turned them on and didn't realize they had turned it on or forgot they had turned it on. And here we come to help them remember. So, here's an example of the antennas on the aircraft itself. The 461 is a little antenna in comparison to the 1215, which makes sense since it's a higher frequency. Interesting thing about that, those antennas, and this is a technique. If you're on the ground, you can DF to which aircraft it is fairly quickly, even just using an airband radio, using detuning and whatnot. If you detune it enough that you don't hear it, but then you touch the antenna that's transmitting, you'll pick it up, and you can verify, yep, this is it, the exact aircraft it's in. Say if you have a line of them. Let's go to the next one. Yeah, they don't always survive the crash. That is true. It's another piece of equipment. The transmitter is usually towards the back of the plane. So, but if that part is destroyed in the crash, or there's a fire or something, it may not work, or it may not work for very long. So, let's go next. This one, it looks like it got ejected from the aircraft. Is that what it looks like to you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one ELT we found was in a plane in a hangar where the owner or somebody had pulled the transmitter out of its normal sort of bracket in the back of the plane, and it was on one of the front seats, and it was on. We're not really sure why, but we got in there and turned it off.
There's a note here that says that less than 1/3 of all crashes have a survivable ELT.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Hmm.
So although it's useful for us when looking for an overdue aircraft, we don't always have the luxury of having an ELT going off.
Yeah. So let's go to the next one here. Of course, we have the military beacons. I didn't realize that parachuting personnel have beacons as well. I guess that's a good idea. They have, typically will have survival radios, which they can transmit on. But, they do have a unit that acts, on 243, just like our GA aircraft do. And we can monitor and track those. But I don't know of any where we've done more than maybe locate it to a particular airfield, and then they typically take over from there. Actually, yeah.
I was gonna say I picked up one at Travis, and we
Yeah, I
called
have
the
too.
tower.
Yeah.
And we said, you know, can we come down and we'll help you find it? And they said, absolutely not.
Yeah, I've had that experience too.
Yeah. A few minutes later, it ceased.
Yep.
Yeah.
They have some knowledgeable people too. Here's some examples of PLBs. These are, I don't know, fairly new. What maybe the last 10, 20 years they've had them. They've become more common. I know one of my daughters likes to go backpacking, and we got her one because, you know, hey, you're out in the middle of some wilderness area and something happens. Just another survival tool, a safety tool. Most of them, yeah, they're 406 with the 121 homing signal, but it's low power. And they have the built-in GPS receiver, most of them now, that will provide a location. And they are supposed to be registered. I'm not sure how well that rule is followed, but that is, yeah, another option. And our boats, you know, at least good-sized ones that are well maintained and people use frequently will have an EPIRB on them, similar to an ELT. Of course, they're mandatory in commercial vessels, and most, again, will have the newer 406 megahertz EPIRBs. And just like on aircraft, some will be automatically activated and others you have to turn them on. So, what are some other devices that will help us locate people that are electronic in nature? Well, phones, not just smartphones, but phones. In fact, we have a whole cell phone forensics team that will help locate vehicles, people, lost hikers, what have you, based on the pings of the phones. Spot is satellite based, and there's specific transmitters you can get for that system. I don't think it's that widespread since we have the newer PLB systems now. I've never heard of spider tracks. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, we've actually used them early on for the radar mission.
Oh, okay.
But it's another one of these ones where you know, on a pretty regular basis, every 10 minutes or so, it sends a transmission to a satellite, and it's linked in, you know, so you can tell somebody you can monitor me, and you know, they can see you climbing up the mountain, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's just another brand.
Yeah, so there's other things. I mean, Delarm, well, it's now Garmin, has InReach. I actually have one of these, so just have it attached to my flight bag, and if I ever need it, it's there. And then there are sat phones. More and more people are getting sat phones, and used to be, you know, Iridium was the only game in town, but now there's a bunch of other providers. That's not even all of them. There's more of them. Okay, so let's talk about 406. So these are designed specifically to operate with the satellite system, the SARSAT COSPAS system. They have a data burst every 50 milliseconds.
It's 50 seconds.
It's 50 seconds. Yeah, that's an error in the chart. Sorry about that. Anyways, yeah, every 50 seconds, which that has, so it's not just a signal, you know, just a sound, an oral signal. It actually has a digital data burst that includes the location, if it's GPS, if it's hooked up to a GPS input, and then also the owner, you know, or whoever's registered the transmitter. But key thing there, every 50 seconds. So it's not continuous like the 1215. It does have the homing signals on the other frequencies, 121.5, or in the case of the military, 243. I'm not sure that I've heard any of those will transmit GPS coordinates. In any case, our receivers can't pick that up, so we can just pick up the oral signal. So the good thing about that coded signal, you know, if it's registered appropriately, and if it's an aircraft, the aircraft, when it was registered, they also re-register the transmitter. It's a different system of registration. And so we don't see a lot of these because most of them are resolved at, you know, before they call Cap. But every once in a while we do. We had one at a few years ago at Reed Hillview, and I guess it had been going off for a while, and I don't know the reason why, but the 1215 homing signal was no longer active. So we had to DF on the 406 signal, which is a little trickier because it's not continuous. It's only every 50 seconds. So you wait until you get the burst, and then you get a direction, and you kind of go in that direction, and then, you know, you stop and wait till you get the next one 50 seconds later. I'm like, okay, are we still going the right way, kind of thing. So, and in that case, we didn't have a handheld. So we actually taxied the plane around the airport for an hour to figure out which specific hangar it was in. That was fun.
I think the critical point here is that if it's properly registered and the GPS works, AFRCC will look up the person and call them and ask them if it's really real, which really means that when we get a call about a 406, it's going to be a weird one.
Yep.
It's either not registered, or the GPS is damaged in some way, or
in this case, they were installing it, and in the process of installing it, they turned it on or something, and they didn't. It probably hadn't been registered yet. So
we don't get the easy ones.
Yeah. I don't know if it's true that they're still very expensive. I don't know that you can get a 1215 only transmitter anymore.
I'm pretty sure the lobby kept that from being made a law.
I think they're required. Yeah.
No, I think you still can.
Really?
Yeah, I think the cheap pilot lobby is very strong.
Okay then. So I guess we'll still have business for a while longer.
The same as requiring ADSB. They weren't able to do that.
Yeah, that's true.
So there's plenty of planes out there. They're not supposed to be, you know, in congested airspace in a Class B or Class C, but we see them around.
Yep. Yeah, down at Hollister, the glider and the tow plane do not show up on ADSB. Or at least they weren't last time I went down there and ran into them in the traffic pattern. Okay, so the advantage of the newer system with the satellite is you're getting a lot more accuracy. So 1215 is, well, 12 to 15 nautical mile radius. Actually, when we get the reports, they're often from several airliners, and they come up. I don't know if there's a picture in here of that. They come up as big circles that kind of overlap from 30,000 feet. You know, it's like there's an ELT down there somewhere, and you kind of look at that, and you look at the density of the overlapping circles and say, yeah, it's in that general area. And oftentimes there's an airport in the area, so we'll focus our search in the direction of that airport. But with the 406, of course, especially if they're properly registered and hooked up to GPS, then it's a lot closer. Yeah. The signal from the 406 goes to the satellite every 50 seconds. That's that data burst. So, and that's the strong signal. It's that homing signal that's low wattage. And which we can pick up with our DF units. It's just you have to get kind of close before you can actually pick it up. All right. Any questions on these so far? Key point here is typically we're going to be looking, especially for aviation, 1215 or 406. And 406, they tend to be resolved before they even call Capt, so it's more likely it's going to be 1215. Okay, we do have practice beacons. In fact, I think just about every squadron has one. And they all are supposed to use 121775. I'm told that some of them may still have other frequencies, but don't use those though. Only use the 121775. And the other thing, key thing here is when we are doing practice searches, don't use ELT on the radio because it could cause confusion. Use the term practice beacon. Even when talking to ATC, although normally they don't really care about practice beacons, you might, if they're asking what you're doing, you can say we're prosecuting a practice beacon, not an ELT. Now you can turn on these ELTs to test them, and there's some rules associated with that. Unfortunately, some people forget about the rules and don't do it just within the first 5 minutes of an hour and only for 3 audible sweeps. They may leave it on for quite a long time or not, at a time when you're wondering, is this a real emergency or not? The 406s themselves, though, are never activated. Some of them will have a self-test feature, but it shouldn't send a signal to the satellite. So when was the last time you tested an ELT in your aircraft? Honestly, I have a mechanic. They do all of that servicing for us. Presumably when you change the batteries, you're going to test it, make sure it still works. How about monitoring 1215? I know in the Capt checklist we have it, but just in general, are people using that as part of their personal checklist?
No, I don't usually monitor it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's
I was going to
apparently
say, real quick question though, isn't it checked during the 100-hour and the annuals as well?
I don't know that that's a requirement. I'm not a mechanic, but okay. They do have to change the batteries every so often. Is it annually or every 2 years? Or after it's been used continuously for like an hour or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, they're supposed to change the battery. So.
Okay. Yeah, I've always assumed that if the aircraft is serviced every 100 hours and annually, that those are checked. But I guess it doesn't.
I would think
do it yourself.
I would think not, because I would think, given the number of aircraft out there and how many are in maintenance at any given time, and I'm just looking at Palo Alto, that you would hear, the 1215 at the top of every hour, almost daily,
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. Okay.
Or even look at the light, in the G1000 aircraft, there's a little red light there next to the switch. You check to make sure it's not on. Ensure your ELT didn't activate. But they say this isn't considered a test, by the way, but you can try it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, inadvertent activation. Hard landings, yes. That was, I think, my very first Capt mission was a 6 o'clock on an Easter Sunday morning, flying out to Concord, and apparently someone had landed the night before and put the plane away and didn't check that they had set off the ELT. Hard handling on the ground. This could be, we found one at Reed Hillview not too long ago that was in maintenance. It was out on the ramp, and I'm wondering, you know, maybe someone just bumped around back there and turned it on. Not sure. I mean, I think it was in annual because they had the seats out. So inadvertent change of switch position. Now, I'm not sure all the units have a very clear indication of what is off and on, but there is a switch, and you know, maybe you thought you turned it off when you actually turned it on. It's possible, I guess. Certainly during removal installation, we've found those. Oh, I just installed it yesterday. It's going off. Yeah. And now you have to change the batteries because it was going off all night. Malfunctions are not very common, but I suppose it could, especially maybe if it's an older unit. I guess there could be non-ELT sources on 1215. It wouldn't sound the same, but yeah. And of course, Murphy raises his head now and then. One of the interesting things too is with the older ones, the signal's pretty strong in compared to the 406s, and like at Reed Hillview, the ground frequency is what, 12165, and if it's a strong enough 1215 signal, it could swap the ground frequency, at least in the plane that set it off. So. So yeah, again, 97% are false alarms. For the 1215s, I guess it looks like 1 in 1,000 are actual emergencies. And then for the 406, it's more like 1 in 10. So, but again, we don't get many of the 406 because they get resolved, you know, by FRCC before they get to us. So what's the big deal? Well, this is why they use Capt, because we're cheap in comparison to other options. So it does waste time and manpower to get them turned off, and they do block communications. Yeah. I like this. Only 3 are real out of 100. Check your ELT. So tell your buddies, you know, when you fly, oh, you don't have that on your checklist. Hey, why don't we add that in there? Let's pencil that in there. So just in case, right? Yeah.
Okay, so this next section is basically the general plan of how we're going to approach searching for an ELT. This is a little bit of the history on it. This is they only switched over in 2009. The satellites no longer monitor 121.5 and 243. They are only looking at 406 signals now. So 121.5 signals have to be initially either heard by pilots in the area, air traffic control facilities. Sometimes you'll find a hobbyist out there who's listening to 121.5. So we need to put together a mission-based staff to assist on this. Here's a kind of weird representation of where a transmitter's going off and we're receiving it because we're at different altitudes. The transmit signal has a cone and the receive has a cone, and they only intersect in that small green area. So in the event that 406 is activated, it transmits the position information. It also starts a sweep tone on 121.5. Again, it's low power. One of the things we've seen in the past is that you'll get close and then use the 121.5 to narrow it down. This 50-second interval, like Louise said, it's it makes it trickier to DF. The Beckers will actually see it and give you a marble. We'll talk a little bit about that later in the afternoon. But it has this information. There's a serial number, a country code, an ID code, hopefully, and the position location if it's coupled to a working GPS, and the GPS antenna can see it. Hopefully this information gets pulled up by AFRCC and we don't get a phone call. So when there's no position data, the satellites use a technology called Doppler shift to try to get an estimate of where the transmission is happening. This accuracy is to within 1 to 3 nautical miles. This is a good example of where they'll have a 406 report, but no GPS coordinates. And so they'll give us an area that's close, and then we do the final DFing with the 121.5. These satellites are in orbit, so they're not geostationary. They're not looking at it all the time, and so sometimes we'll have to wait for the next pass, or a pass will go by and they won't receive a signal, but then another pass will go by and they will receive a signal. If it's marginal, it could be a problem. So these are all things that kind of come up. Again, treating ELT missions as an emergency, it's not possible to know whether it's real or not, so we treat them as though they are. Also, if you take advantage of them, every ELT mission allows you to keep your skills sharp. So the biggest part of this chapter covers searching for 121.5 because it may be the one, it's more likely that a 406 that we're activated for involves a 121.5. So these are the techniques that we use. Just a reminder that it's significantly weaker. There is some support for Doppler DFing in the Becker and the Rho Theta direction finding gear later. So you want to start with a route search or a parallel search to pick up the signal that may involve climbing, so that you have a better line of sight to where the transmitter is. It may involve large track spacing so that you can cover a lot of ground. And then once you detect the signal, then you can start DFing it. Direction Finder compares signal strengths from 2 antenna patterns. This is actually very similar to how VOR works. When you're centered on a signal headed directly toward or away from the signal source, and then it can tell you which direction to turn when you're not centered. This says it's similar to an ADF, which we don't use.
Yeah, it's more like an ADF, so, but we don't have a lot of ADFs, right? So.
Right. So here's the old version of the DF gear from Eltronics. This is what it looks like on the, I think we only have 3 of these left in California Wing. One by one, they die off and they get replaced. Also, we're replacing aircraft, but still good to know how to do this. There's 2 modes. One's called one's called alarm and one's called DF. Alarm is you're asking it to give an alarm when it detects a signal above a certain strength. And so you might use this when you're not actually prosecuting a beacon or an ELT, just as kind of you're off on some other kind of flight profile and you just want to monitor it. The alarm will go off once a certain signal strength. It can catch your attention if you're not specifically looking for an ELT. The other mode, which is called DF mode, is when the switch is down, and that basically is you're full-time prosecuting an ELT there. Some of them have a remote meter. I've never actually seen one. Normally, this is right up on the dash. A quick look at the antennas. The old style 3 antennas up on top there. Again, the antennas are under the aircraft because it's expected that we'll be above a transmitting signal. The Becker antenna looks like this oil can. It's a pretty complex set of stuff inside there. Again, step 1, acquire the signal. A couple things you can do to help out. One of them is turn the sensitivity way up on the electronics receiver or on one of your comm radios. If you're listening on comm 2, maybe you want to change the squelch, maybe even open the squelch so that you'll hear a very far away signal.
And actually, they typically want you to do that. Turn off the squelch, and because you're going to want to report where you are when you first hear it, as you're going towards the location. That's right. What the IC will want to know.
Right, and it's been my experience that you will hear an ELT on COM2 on one of the comm radios long before the Becker will sense it. And so if you're headed in the direction, you know, you really don't have much information yet, opening up the squelch on the comm radio will definitely be your first indication that you hear it. And then you can sort of do a crude, you know, as the signal builds, you're headed in the right direction. Often by that point, you can start to use the Becker. Proceed at a reasonable altitude or to the point designated by your incident commander. Often we'll have a last known position of maybe an airliner flew by and said, you know, we're hearing one, you know, we're over thus and such VOR at 10,000 feet, you know, then we'll head in that direction to go try to pick up the SNET. So altitude selection is important at this point. This picture is to try to show how the plane on the left, if the ELT is in the middle, the plane on the left, the ELT is, the signal is blocked by the mountain. So the way you would hear it is to climb higher than that. The same for the vehicle on the ground. The mountain is in the way. On the other side of that mountain, the signal is heard, and so the aircraft will hear it. The vehicle will hear it in front, but not in back if they're at the top of another hill. So keep this in mind in terms of wanting to make sure that you don't block yourself by terrain in the aircraft. Very often we'll try to become higher than the highest peak.
Yeah, so the moral is basically line of sight. You have to establish that.
It is absolutely a line of sight transmitter. Yeah. Although there's bounces, there's reflections. RF is hard, but in general, you're going to go with line of sight. So it says higher is better to acquire the signal. Medium is better for searching after you've heard it.
And do we get into the reflections and bounces? I mean, you think about it.
Yes.
Those signals are going to be less strong. So you're looking for the stronger signal.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a whole slide on reflections.
Yeah.
Here's an idea of how far is line of sight. It can be over 250 miles if you're at up in the flight levels. If you're at 5,000 feet and you hear it, you're no further than 30 miles away. How about that? Is that a good example? Okay, that was step 1. Step 2 is to direction find it. There's lots of different ways to do it. We're going to talk about a couple of different ones. Sometimes a combination is best. So wing shadowing is the most crude version, which is if you fly in a circle, at some point the wing will block the signal to the receiver antenna, causes an audible decrease in volume called a null. Almost any aircraft communications radio can be used with this method. The idea is that the opposite direction is the direction you should then head in. So you can do this when it's when you're far enough away to have just acquired the signal, and it's too far for the Becker to converge a solution on it. It's also very useful in rugged terrain where reflections would be more significant. So fly a circle, listen for the null, head in the opposite direction of the null. So in order to do this, you absolutely have to know where the antenna for the radio you're using is installed. They're usually, but not always, located above the wings. It can be above the fuselage or in the tail. The DF antennas are maybe above or below. I've only ever seen them below. This also is something for those of you who are out in your GA aircraft. If you have a low wing aircraft, your comm radios might be in different places. But hopefully the Cap aircraft that we use are all high wing. Here's an example of that. You're going to see the comm antennas, in particular COM1, COM2, will be above the wing on Cap aircraft. EF air antennas below, like that, either the old LPER or the CAN, which is typically a little further back.
Okay, so how do we DF by wing shadowing or the wing null method? The idea is you fly a constant bank 360-degree turn, and you set your audio so that you're hearing the signal, but it's not, super strong. You're hearing the signal, and you will hear, when the wing shadows the antenna. You're in a bank, right? You will hear at some point in that 360-degree that it gets noticeably quieter, and sometimes even goes away. So when your wing blocks the antenna's reception of the ELT signal, okay, so you're banking, right? Say you're banking to the left. Got a picture? Oh, there you go. So when the antenna is pointed away from the signal, the wings are blocking it, right? Now, I hope you're not banking at 60, 70 degrees like that, but 30 or 40, 30 degrees is fine. But when you're banking away, and this works when you're a little further away and a little higher up, when you're banking away from that signal and the wing is blocking it, it will null. It will decrease in volume noticeably or even go away. So what you want to do at that point in time for the MOs is ask the pilot, what's our heading? And note down the heading. Because if you see, now in this case, we're turning to the right, okay? If you see your heading, say you're heading at north, your signal is going to be, what, west? It's going to be 90 degrees to your left.
Right.
Guys, can you visualize that?
Inverse. It's just the inverse of the course where, you get that complete null signal, right? You mark your course and then you just take the inverse, right?
Well, okay, so the antenna is pointing right. If the antenna is pointing, yes, the inverse of the direction the antenna is pointing, but your heading is not the direction the antenna is pointing. It's 90 degrees off of that. So if you're looking at your heading indicator, subtract or add 90 degrees depending on your direction of turn. Yeah.
Okay.
You gotta get out there and practice it. It's you can actually do this, practice this on, say, an ATIS signal. You don't have to use an ELT. You can turn your airband to an ATIS signal. Set the squelch real low, and you're far enough away that you hear it, mostly. And then as you're turning, it nulls out and it goes away. Right? And you know where it is, so you can check your math and make sure you got it right.
But this would only work if you're in a right-hand bank, right? What if you're in a left bank?
Well, then you add instead of subtract.
Okay.
So that's the math. You gotta go out there and practice it. And I'm not sure if it's in the charts, but this is just one circle. You can do this a couple times from different locations and use those directions to find an intersection, right? And you where those directions from where you were at those different aircraft positions, where they cross on your map, on your sectional that you have out, right? That'll be the general location of the ELT. A lot closer than just, it's kind of north of here, you know, right?
The usual thing is that upon first contact with the ELT, you can do a wing null and get a general idea, and then head in that direction. And first of all, the signal should be getting stronger.
Right.
If it's not, you know, you might want to try something else. But it's this incremental. Right. The key is you want incremental success, and you want to have each of the next steps confirm your suspicion, or, you know, make you think you might be in a situation where you're being fooled.
So just as a point of interest, when you do go to Mission Aircrew School, ESTA, WESTA, whatever we're calling it, this is one of the sorties you'll have to go out and find a practice beacon. And this is an opportunity to practice these techniques. You definitely should try the wing null more than once. Okay, obviously if the antennas are below the wing, then it's the opposite, right? Just know where your antennas are, because when they're pointing away from the ELT, the body of the plane is blocking the ELT signal. And so that's how you know. Okay, next is the oral search method, meaning the strength or the volume of the signal that you're hearing. So this is based on that assumption that equal beacon strength is circular. You don't adjust the volume during this search. I don't know anyone who does this alone. I mean, it's a useful set of information, but depending on how good your ears are, you might not be able to tell very well how, especially as you get close, how the strength of the signal is changing. So key here, begin plotting your position as soon as you receive the signal. And for that, we talked about having the squelch out. You not only plot your position, but report it. The base is going to want to know the first time you hear the position, or if there's no base, you know, put that in your log for your 104 when you get back. Fly a course for a short distance. In this case, we're turning left or right, no, left, 90 degrees, and then keep going until the signal starts to fade. So turn around there, mark where the signal fades, and then do the same thing on the other side. You can plot the chord lines. There is a diagram here, bisect chord lines next at a perpendicular, and then that gives you the location of the target. This is kind of...
this is a little easier to see.
Yeah, here we go. So this is what you're doing. So you hear the signal, okay? You keep going in the direction where you're hearing it. In this case, we're turning left and go out until it starts to fade. And that's that, you know, equal signal strength circle, barely audible at that point. Turn back around the other direction and go until you hear it fade again on the other side of the circle. And there's your two chord lines, the chord 1 and the chord 3, well, then there's the chord 2, and then you do that, bisect the chord 2 and towards the center of the circle. That's where it should be. But honestly, this is kind of complicated to do in a moving aircraft. I have not seen it done in practice. But try it out. See how it works.
Yeah, try to fly with John Helt. He loves this pattern.
Oh, he does. Okay.
And he's good at it.
Yeah.
But yes, it's a little tricky. And the reminder to tell the base, the other thing to remember is you're not out here alone. There's a whole team of people who have computers and maps and things that are not easily used by you in the moving aircraft. So feed that information back. They're all there to help you.
Yeah, I mean, you think about this circle of equal strength. Maybe you don't have the mechanism to easily plot that, but you can give them the locations, the GPS locations, and someone at the base can plot it for you.
Right.
Yeah. All right. This is a tricky one, but take note and give it a try. All right, the build and fade method. This one requires you have a signal strength meter. You can kind of do this with the Becker if you keep adjusting the squelch. It's kind of a similar method. So note your signal strength when beginning the search, fly a straight line until the signal gets lower, and then similarly, right? Turn 180 degrees, return the lowest level signal, and then go 90 degrees left or right. And that now you should be either going directly towards or away. This is something that you will do on the ground in the UDF team, right? Very frequently, a lot of our handheld UDFs have a signal strength meter on them. And so then right away, if it's increasing the strength, you're headed towards it, or if it decreases, you're heading away. So turn back 180 and now you're headed towards it. So that's the idea there. And here's a depiction of that with actual numbers on it. We don't have a lot of aircraft that still have the LPER in it, though, I think. At least in Group 2, we don't. So may or may not be able to practice this.
Right. This is sort of an exact version if you have a meter.
Mm-hmm.
But those people who've done it a bunch get to the point where they get the ELT Whisperer activity badge. But the idea is sort of the same, right? You're headed in the direction where it is either building or fading. If it's building, that's good. Try to figure out where it starts to fade again. Keep going because it might be a temporary problem, and then turn around and do it again. Where that point is, turn either left or right, because then you're on the right radial for it. You may be headed away, in which case it fades. In that case, turn around, and now you should be pointed directly at it.
Yeah. So one good thing about this too is even with the Becker, if you fiddle with the squelch, you can say, okay, I have to increase the squelch to the point where it's just breaking squelch. I have to keep increasing it. And then when you cross, when it starts to fade, it's the other way around. I have to keep decreasing it so it continues to break squelch. And so that's another way of kind of figuring out a strength.
Right. It's a little trickier because as you move, your local interference can change.
True.
Which more so impacts the Becker.
Right.
But still, the idea is the same, right? You can sort of use geometry to small number of steps, get yourself oriented so you're flying directly at it.
Okay. I don't think this is true. Most of ours have
The word most is incorrect.
yeah, most of ours have the Becker in them now, so.
Yeah.
But, for what it's worth, there are two varieties. And here's the panel here. The dual meter model has that separate strength meter on it, so.
Right. You basically get to see both meters at the same time. The single meter is the older one, and you have to change the mode between receive and DF.
Right. The
dual meter shows both of them at the same time.
What does A3 Echo have in it? I forget.
A3 Echo has a dual meter.
Has a dual meter, okay.
Yeah.
And the other the other two aircraft have a Becker in it. This 172 does not have a DF radio, so can't use it for ELT searches unless you're just using wing null.
Right.
So. Or I suppose you could use the oral method with the airband radio.
Yeah, if that was our only asset, we would definitely send it.
Yeah.
But we would try to send a more capable aircraft.
Okay, of course, there's a frequency switch. This is the same thing on the Becker, between the different, 1215, 121775, which is for the practice beacon, 243, which is the military frequency. I'm not sure why they have 1216 on there. Was that used for something in the past?
Yeah, 121.6 is detuning.
Oh, I see.
Right. So the idea is you're not on the frequency that you're looking for. So this is helpful when you're close and the signal is overwhelming you.
Do we have a chart on that, the detuning? I think we do. Okay.
I think it's more so found in the UDF training.
Oh, maybe in the UDF training. Okay. UDF training. It's very useful for you. I highly recommend it. And oh, by the way, with respect to UDF, all of our aircraft are supposed to have sniffers in them as well, handhelds. So it's that the newer ones are in that tubular case in the back of the plane. So again, 121775 used for training. Aux position.
Since we don't have any of the single meter ones, it doesn't really matter.
Doesn't matter.
It's a strange training mode.
Okay. So you're getting some history here.
Yeah.
Now for the mode switch, again, it's only for the single meter units. So you have the receive mode to make they call it a dial, but the indicator, the sensor in the needle in the middle acts as a strength meter, and then if you turn it to DF, it acts as a homing, left-right homing. An alarm is used during normal flying. This is just to alert you that, hey, there's an ELT or reperb or PLV or something going off.
Right.
On the frequency that you selected.
This is the equivalent of squelching whatever radio you're using. It'll unsquelch if it picks up a strong signal that would alert you to, hey, there's an ELT going off near you.
Yeah.
You had no idea. But
so what do you do if there's an ELT going off near you? Do you go try to find it? No. We don't self-deploy, right? You gotta get a mission. So you can report it. And in fact, we often in our SARXs, we have in the briefing, what to do about a no play, a real ELT that's heard. But yes, we don't self-deploy.
If you have a bearing, fine. You want your location and your altitude when you heard it. That's what you want to report.
Yep. Okay, on here, this is the dual mode, and it has a volume sensitivity controls. So volume controls, of course, the audio level to the speaker or headsets. And you know what? I don't know which panel. So the Becker is tied to the aux channel on the G1000, but on the non G1000 planes, is there a particular panel? Is it
I
an
think
aux
sometimes
as
it's ADF.
Is it the ADF?
So sometimes it is, sometimes it's wired into the intercom.
Wired into the intercom. Interesting. Okay. I don't think I've ever.
So that's the thing about the single meter one. You have the alarm mode because otherwise you would just be hearing static all day.
Right.
So
But here there's a sensitivity or a squelch, basically.
it's not a squelch.
It's not, but
it's actually controlling a preamp.
Oh, okay.
Right. So when you turn the sensitivity up, what you're doing is you're increasing the gain on the preamp. So it helps you with signals that are further away. And then once you get closer, you want to turn the sensitivity down to be more accurate.
Yeah. So as the signal gets stronger, yes, reduce the sensitivity, not necessarily the volume, although you may also want to reduce the volume.
The volume's going to be pretty much constant.
Yeah. It's interesting that the DF being unreliable and there's too much signal received. Yeah, I guess you could swamp the receiver.
Right. Since the way this is working is it's looking at the difference between the signal coming into each of the two antennas.
Yeah.
If there's a lot of signal, that accuracy goes way down.
Yeah. So that's something to, if you're using this kind of equipment, be aware of. In a rule of thumb, 3/4 scale is too much, so keep it down below that.
Right.
So, okay. Half scale or the middle is optimum. Okay, here's the settings. So on missions, of course, we're going to use 1215, selecting the DF mode. Once we go into DF mode, basically, start with the sensitivity and maximum, and then volume and mid, and then as the DF needle moves. Now, if you're not on a DF mission, on a ELT mission, you can still use this, again, this unit in alarm mode, again with 1215, sensitivity at maximum, and report if you pick up anything. It might generate a mission for someone else. And in the dual meter models, again, selecting 1215, alarm toggles off because now we're in a real mission. Start off with the sensitivity at maximum, volume at mid scale, and DF, keep the needle centered as you go towards it. As the strength meter moves up, and scale it to the right. For this unit on non-mission flights, again 1215, and to put it in alarm mode, you got to put that alarm toggle on, and again use maximum sensitivity, just to see if you pick anything up. And I think. Yeah, well, anyways, just as you pre-flight the rest of the aircraft, pre-flight your DF, make sure that it's working. So it turns on.
Right, a great time to do this for the observer is after engine start. Your pilot is going to go get the current ATIS. That's a perfect time to make sure you do a functional check on the DF. Turn it on, make sure the volume is set to what you want. Open the squelch so you know the difference between squelched and unsquelched.
Right.
And then set the squelch just above the threshold so that it will open once you get a signal.
And there are more detailed procedures in the reference text, so take a look at those. Again, when you go on that first practice flight, that first SARX or Westa sortie to do this, try all these things out. When you go to Bakersfield, you won't know what aircraft you're going to be assigned. You may be assigned one with a Becker in it. You may be assigned one with one of these electronics, and see what you can do with it. So the basic approach, whether it's airborne or even in UDF, with whatever equipment you have, is basically the same, right? Whether it's the ELTs you're looking for, EPIR, PLB, recommendation, use the full procedure every time. Then that way you don't miss anything. And the words to remember: receive, half, DF, turn, check, shoot. And we're going to go through those in the next set of slides. So receive. Once you've started to receive the signal on the right frequency, again, if you have a single meter unit, turn to receive to get it. If you have a dual meter, refer to the strength window. Okay. In the receive mode or in the strength window, the unit measures the signal strength. Left is low, right is high, and the relative, depending on the sensitivity that you've selected. Of course, you start off with high sensitivity, and as you get closer, you'll want to adjust that because you want to kind of keep the needle in the middle. I'm not sure if this is true. I know we've had problems with these units before. The strength meter may or may not continue to work if the DF is not working. Yes, you can locate the ELT only in receive mode. I mean, you can use these other techniques, right? The Earl method, the metering method, the metering method, or even a wing null. So try those methods if it appears your unit's not working completely. Okay, so that's step one, receive. What's next? Half. So now that you have it in receive mode and you have a good signal, turn the sensitivity knob to half scale. So center of the window. Keep that needle in the center. If you're flying with the dual meter unit, turn the sensitivity knob so that the half scale in the strength window. Same thing. So again, we're doing this so that we don't have too much signal that would mess up DF from working. So it's best for the homing antennas. Those are those three little antennas you have under the aircraft for this model. Okay, step 3, DF. For single meter units, as you're getting closer, turn the mode selector knob to DF. I like this. DF means direct to the flipping target. It actually means direction finding, but okay. And then for dual meter models, you don't change the mode, you just refer to the other window, the DF window. And you see down there, there's 2 or 3 element. I've only seen 3, but there's 3 elements to the antenna. It is directional. So one element receives the signal and the others reflect the signal away from the first rod. Don't ask me how that works. That just seems like RF magic, but in any case, it works. Maybe, Jordan, you have a more technical explanation for how it works.
We don't have that kind of time.
Okay. Well, this is actually the antenna reception pattern. I'm not sure why we're going through this, but in any case, yeah, if you do any work in RF, antennas have a lobe pattern associated with how they receive or transmit, for that matter, signal. So that's what that is. All right, so once you're using the direction finding mode or looking at that needle in the DF window, it alternates the receiving and reflecting antenna. Okay, so it chooses one element as the receiver and the other two as reflectors, and then it switches. So it reproduces that pattern. And you can kind of see that pictured here, those two patterns overlapped on each other. And by comparing the two patterns, the unit determines when they're equal. When they're equal, that's when the needle centers. So when the needle is centered, the target is either directly ahead of you or behind you. This is true of the handhelds as well. So, so one of those methods, like the metering method, could be used to help you determine which direction it's coming from, or the oral method for that matter. Next, turn. So you need to turn at least one full circle, noting where the DF needle centers. Under ideal conditions, it'll center twice, one when it's facing directly at the source and one when it's facing 180 degrees away from the target, because of course you can't tell if it's in front of you or behind you using this method alone. You'll figure that out in the next step though. So first turn and figure out what line you're on there. Okay, so here's a depiction of that. ELT could be in front of you or could be behind you. If you're pointed towards possibility 1, it could be actually possibility 2. This is when the DF needle centers, what it looks like. Then you check. Now we're going to figure out which direction it is. The phrase used here is turn to tell. Remember that the needle is always points to the target. So when you have the needle centered, turn left or right. So if you turn left and the needle goes left, then the ELT is the other way, right? If you turn left and the needle turns right, then it was dead ahead. Does that make sense? The needle points towards the target. When you're right on the line, it's pointing towards the target. You just can't tell if it's in front of you or behind you because you're right on the line. The needle is centered, right? That's what's considered ambiguity in this context. To solve it, you turn left. If the needle the needle's always pointing directly to the target, if the needle points right, then when you turn left, the needle moves right, it's still pointing at 1. If you turn left and the needle goes left, it's pointing towards 2. Can you picture that?
Yep.
There we go. Okay, this is a lot of charts to say a very simple thing. So you're turning to figure out which direction the ELT really is coming from, in front of you or behind you. Okay. Actual ELT position is unknown to the user. Your needle is centered. Make a small turn, left or right. Okay, so what happened? We turned left, the needle moved left. Where is it?
Behind us.
Behind you, that's right.
That's right.
Yeah, there we go. Here's another example. We turned left, but the needle moved right.
In front of us.
So in front of you, yeah. There you go. Okay, and then shoot. Okay, so you're this case, because you don't have a built-in way to determine azimuth, you're going to use your DG. If you're in an older plane, make sure before you start all of this that you've corrected it to your magnetic compass and it hasn't precessed a lot. It helps. So use your DG to determine a bearing to the target, and then you'll follow it. You will fly through a zone of signal dropout or maximum ambiguity. So what are those signs of signal passage? Well, in the case of the Becker, it's easy. The ball, the marble, passes by 90 degrees left or right and settles behind you. In this case, you might have a dropout of signal. You might have some change in the strength of the signal that you're hearing. What other things could you have? The needle could bounce around.
Yeah, the needle will bounce around in the zone of confusion.
Yeah, the needle will bounce around.
Because it doesn't know in what direction it is.
So one of the good things with this, though, I mean, if you're going directly to it, if you figured out what directly to it is, you know what the azimuth is, and you can plot that on a map, right? From the location your aircraft is, you can plot that azimuth forward on a map for some miles, maybe 6 miles or so, and then turn around and come at it from a different direction, maybe 90 degrees. And where those lines cross should be where you're getting closer and closer to the signal. Do that 2 or 3 times, you should get an area of crossing that's fairly small. So in summary, you've got the 2 main modes of operation. You've got the receive and the DF. Again, this is for the electronics. The receive mode is a strength meter. Remember, left is low, right is high, but you want to kind of keep it in the center. The DF mode centers on the signal itself, that from where it's coming from. It always points to the signal. So turn left or right to help solve that ambiguity, whether it's in front of you or behind you. And again, like I mentioned before, the ground units work very similarly. So if you don't have access to an aircraft, most likely you do have a ground unit at your squadron. Pull out the practice beacon and play around with the ground unit and see how that works.
Thanks.
Okay, why don't you talk about reflections?
Okay, so reflections of an ELT signal, it's just like a flashlight off of a mirror. Any flat, hard, or wet object can cause signal reflections. Mountains, hangars, wet grass or snow, large bodies of water or ice, power lines can have a large effect on a low-powered signal, such as an ELT. We had a real-world mission a couple of years ago down in Gilroy, and could hear the ELT, and flew back and forth and could not find the actual source of it. Actually had to get relieved by another aircraft. They ran out of fuel. They had to go back. The second aircraft took another hour and a half. It was very tricky to find the source of it. So this can be a huge part of the problem to resolve. So a couple ways to work against this. Check your sensitivity at half scale or lower. Make sure you get enough signal, but not so high that you might get fooled by a lower power signal. reflections will generally be weaker than the most direct path to the target. So if you can hear the signal in two different places, you're going to want the stronger one. Following reflections will generally take you closer to the target. I love how they say generally. Sometimes it'll take you away from it, but generally that's the way to go. If you've already brought the sensitivity down to the minimum and are still having trouble, try DFing on a different frequency. This is what's called detuning. So for instance, if you're looking for an actual ELT on 121.5, try to do the same while dialed into 121.6, or even our practice frequency 121.775, which is even further away when you're very close. And this is a good all-purpose solution. When all else fails, fly somewhere else. Basically reset. Once you've been following the trail and it's not resolving for you, start over. Fly 5 miles away in a different direction. Try to let go of any of the conclusions you've come to along the way. Try to not be your own worst enemy. Another thing that happens is we'll sometimes get carrier-only signals, and the idea here is that the transmitter's on, but the sweep tone is not being generated. So this is especially true with old batteries, damaged ELTs, or spurious transmissions, i.e. the hard ones that we get. This is often the case. You can identify carrier-only signal by deflection. So if you're looking at the signal strength, you're not gonna be hearing the sweep tone, but you'll see the signal strength change. If you can see that, then it's probably good enough to DF. We have several of our practice beacons that have been modified for carrier-only operation, and this is based on the fact that we've had a number of carrier-only real-world missions in the last 10 years. So hopefully you can get a hold of one of those and practice with that. Comparing with other frequencies can help you to see whether or not you might be in a carrier-only situation. If you check a different frequency and you have the same deflection on both frequencies, then you're not actually DFing. You just have random noise, or your DF unit maybe malfunctioning. Ask us how we know. But if it is different, then keep at it. If a signal is only received on, this is inside baseball here. If it's only received on 243 megahertz, it might be a malfunctioning antenna at a FAA facility. I think this has only happened a couple of times. If you DF to a location, especially if it's near an airport, and you don't end up at an aircraft, you end up at an antenna, find out who it is, tell the IC, and let them see if they can troubleshoot that. Vertical reflections are even trickier. So the transmission pattern of an ELT is not a perfect circle or a sphere. It has low, stronger, weaker points. It's accentuated when the ELT is transmitting from a location above the surrounding ground. So, for instance, if it's in a tree.
I think once we were picking up a signal that was moving, and it was they figured out it was like in a truck or something.
Yeah, we've had situations where we've had inadvertent activations of an ELT in a box in a UPS truck driving down the freeway doing 60 miles an hour. That obviously will give you a good challenge. One of the things about DFing is that you're sort of presuming that the transmitter is static. It's not moving. But if you start doing, especially some of those build and fade patterns, and you get pointed in, some strange direction, it could be because, at each point where you were looking at it, it's actually in a different place. So watch out for that. I think the other, I'm not sure if they, yeah, I guess they mentioned this here in this next slide. One thing you can do about that is if you encounter a signal dropout, keep going. Don't say, oh, we stopped getting it, turn around, because you might actually just be in a null. And when it comes back, if it comes back, when it comes back, it should be stronger than it was before. So this, I don't know if this picture is clear, but the idea is you're flying toward it, and then suddenly you have no signal, and you go a little further, and then now you've got much stronger signal. So there's an example. Obviously, if it doesn't come back, you have to reset and try again. Actual time that you lose it will depend on your distance to the target and 12 other factors that are can't be listed here.
At least they have the propeller moving in this picture. So.
Right, prop blur. So signal strength, the rate of change in signal strength can increase as you get closer to the transmitter. That's because mumble physics. But basically the inverse square law here, the energy you receive from an object, when you double the distance, you get a quarter of the signal. So the further away you get, the more rapidly it drops off. That's another thing to remember. If you have a rapid drop off, you might intuit that you're being fooled by a interference or by entering a lobe. At 90 knots, even if you're going directly away from a transmitter, it's going to drop off relatively slowly. Or admonition to turn down the sensitivity as the signal gets stronger. This will increase your accuracy. Here's that signal strength and rate of change. This is a little odd. Sensitivity units is not a thing. It's just they're trying to show you that as you're turning this knob, if you were to break it into 7 positions, say, you're going to get this sort of this drop off based on how far you are. Finally, we get to talk about the cone of confusion, because all of this is left-right. The issue comes up when you're directly above it. It's no longer to your left or to your right. It's like when you're at the North Pole and every direction is south, right? There's no left or right. So what'll happen is you're pointed at it, you're getting closer, the needles go nuts, and then it resolves itself, and it still looks like you're pointed at it, but you're actually going away from it. So you should definitely, this is one of those things you should try in person so that you know what it looks like when you're in the cone of confusion. And there's a slightly different way you'll see that in the Becker, and we'll get to that when we get to those slides. Perception in the cone of silence. When you're directly above it, you may actually get signal drop off in both strength and volume when you're above it, because the transmitter antenna also has lobes. So here's something you can do while you're waiting for the ground team to show up, is pinpointing the ELT, flies this pattern. It says make an approximate 180-degree turn, but I think what actually happens is you wind up being off by more like 120. So do it again, DF it again from a different direction, DF it from 3 directions, DF it from 4 directions. Hopefully what happens is you converge on a particular spot, and you can get GPS coordinates for that to help the ground team. You also at that point might be able to see something.
Yeah, look out the window.
Yeah.
What do you see? I think we did one where we went up to McClellan, and as we were crossing over it, while the ground team was getting there, we were crossing over it and was like, wow, there's a taxiway there. There's 5 aircraft on that taxiway, and pretty sure it's one of those. And we told the ground team, and when they got there, it's like, yep, we found it. So.
Right. Since all of these techniques for DFing ultimately give you a bearing toward the transmitter, you should be able to do it in any number of ways and get the same answer. Right. So that's how you can confirm it once you're pretty sure that's where it is. It also might help you to, if you do it a couple of times and you're pretty sure, and you do it a couple more times and you get conflicting answers, then you might have to continue, seeing where it was you got fooled. Maybe it's a reflection. Maybe you've got a signal coming out of the end of a transmission line, things like that. So do it a couple times. You're already there. You're already in the plane. Hours have gone by already. You might as well make another pass. Right, after you think you have the target located, make a low pass over the suspected location and visually scan. If the signal strength decreases significantly or drops out when you do that, you might have to reset and try it again. Sometimes false targets will appear due to reflections. But if you hear the ELT at low altitude, you probably have the right place. Again, we're talking about line of sight for these transmissions. And so if you're down at 1,000 AGL and you can hear it, you're probably close. Although passed on a runway might be a good idea if you suspect a particular airport. You can, if there's a flight line that you can fly past, you may actually see the zone of confusion as you make your way down the runway. Remember, when we go out on these missions, the goal is not to find the thing. The goal is to accumulate clues that help us put together confirmation of the thing we're trying to find. So every piece of information, write it down, put the time, put your location, put your altitude. Because if you get a tricky one, you're going to need more information. You're going to need more clues. All right, any question about that before we move on to the Becker? Okay, should we move on?
Doppler DF units. Okay, so keep in mind what you just saw. There's a lot of overlap here. Slightly different mechanisms, but the general overview perspective is the same kind of process. So we've got these 2 units, Becker, rho theta, and I forget who bought who. They're basically the same unit, right? I think it was rho theta and then it became Becker. Is that right? Well, in any case.
Becker was the marketing name for the earlier unit.
Okay.
And we have both of them, and they are actually different.
That's true.
The DF517 and the RT600
they are slightly different. That's true. But the theory of operation is the same. And there is apparently an advanced ELT presentation, so we're not going to go over the Doppler shift. They are fairly easy to use. They give you a lot of good information. they display a slightly delayed average heading to the beacon. It's not actually heading, it's relative heading. Okay, so it's not connected to GPS or your compass or anything like that. It's a relative heading. It allows you to monitor multiple frequencies, so you'll have to practice changing frequencies on it, making sure you're looking at the right one. They can process the 406 frequencies. Now, some of them only process a subset of the 406, and the newer ones will process all of them. So also understand what you got there. And of course, the 1215 homing signal as well. If you have a 406 that you're prosecuting and you're looking for its corresponding 1215, be aware again that it's much lower power than the older beacons. So you're not going to hear it until you get a lot closer. Just like 1215, 406, even though it's higher frequency, can still well, actually, this is on the GPS side, but yeah, the obstructions can prevent getting a good fix. Just like in the aircraft, if you don't have enough satellites in view, you're not going to get a good fix. And same thing for the 406. Again, as we discussed before, it's transmitted every 50 seconds. It's a chirp, not a continuous or a sweep, rather. And it's the higher power signal that's at 406. Should go through, trees. I'm not sure about crevasses and other formations, but it'll get up to the satellite. So if we get, as it was mentioned before, if we are looking for a 406 ELT, most likely implies that they did not get a location. So, and they might not have been detected by the satellites at all. So there may be some issues with the ELT itself in terms of it being damaged or defective, and that could also impact your ability to prosecute it. So just be aware of that. Again, we have the 1215 homing beacon, but it is weaker.
And this is a place where it might be possible for the decoder on board our aircraft to decode the GPS coordinates because we're closer to it than the satellites are.
If it even is sending out
right.
The one I remember looking for, it wasn't sending a location. So
right. So
yeah.
there's lots of different problems, but one of the problems could be that the signal isn't strong enough. There's too high of an error rate for the decode to happen correctly by the satellites.
Right.
You might be able to
get it. Yeah.
You might be able to decode it.
Yeah. Okay. Again, the newer one, same set of frequencies.
Now this is the older one.
It's the older one.
The DF517 is the older version.
Yeah, the 517 only has the first 3 channels on the 406. But there are actually 19 channels. So when you are looking for 406, you should ask which channel if they know. Otherwise, you're going to have to scan through them.
Right. And the incident command system here is aware of this issue, and so when the report is for one that's on one of the other channels, they will try not to dispatch aircraft that have the older version of the Becker.
Of the Becker, yeah.
So hopefully you don't get into this.
I guess we should start calling them row thetas if the newer ones are row thetas, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, does that make sense to you, understanding the different channels? They're actually offset in frequency slightly. So, which is why you need a receiver that's can be adjusted to receive the different different frequencies.
So there's 19 channels. Each channel selection on the DF gear is in the center of a group of 3. So the first position is actually centered on the second frequency because it can equally pick up the first frequency and the third frequency.
Right.
And then the second channel is on the 5th frequency because it can do 4 to 6, etc.
So there's 6 settings, right? Is that right?
There's 7 settings.
Or 7
for 19 channels.
7 or 6?
I think it's 7.
I don't know. 19 divided by 3 is 6 plus 1.
6. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's
I
call
think
it
it's
6.
6. Yeah.
Right.
Again, like any equipment you use on these aircraft, since they're all slightly different, when you get to the aircraft they assigned you, take a look at what you got and, recall what you saw here, and there should be a manual in the aircraft as well. Take a look at that if you need to refresh your memory. Okay, next. The rho theta. So this is where we're all going eventually. It should monitor all 16 or 19 channels on the 406, plus all the other frequencies that we've talked about so far. Okay, so let's talk about this homing signal. Since the 406 is more accurate, especially if you've got GPS data, they determined that the strength of the 1215 homing signal was not as important, and so it's been reduced. This helps, of course, reduce impact on the use of 1215 for other purposes. So, which is good, right? Because it's annoying, and 97% of the time it's not a real emergency. Well, except for, I guess, in the case of 406s, it's like 90% of the time. So we do have another impact, and that's the detectability of the signal because of the shorter antenna. Because it's optimized for the 406 frequency. This is on the transmitting ELT, is optimized for transmitting on 406. It's not going to transmit as well 1215. So the homing signal effective radio strength is less than 1/10 of the older dedicated non-406 beacons. And those are the ones with the longer antennas. And how do you tell which beacon is on a particular plane? Well, you can, from the outside, look at the size of the antenna. That gives you a clue. The result is you might not detect that 1215 until you get really close. So that's something to be aware of. It might mean flying lower as well as you get closer to the suspected location to see if you can pick it up. Certainly having a ground team or a UDF team on the ground will be helpful. Do we talk, oh, that reminds me, Jordan, do we talk about, maybe it's not today, about coordination with ground team?
We talk about it in the scanner school. You mean like wing wagging and leading the
Yeah,
team?
and just how do you communicate with them generally? This is something you will do at Mission Aircrew School West ESTA. I got to find out a new term for that, but when you have your ELT sortie, you should have an opportunity to coordinate with the ground team, with the UDF team on the ground. And that'll be talking to them on the radio. And the MO sitting in the right seat will probably be the one doing that, along with operating the DF equipment, and helping direct them to where you believe the beacon is, the practice beacon is. You know, giving them, having resources to be able to figure out what street they're on and telling them which direction to drive and which building to look at or what have you. And the faster you can get them to find the practice beacon, the faster you get to go home. So for everyone, or back to the base for lunch. All right, so here we are. Whoop, let's go here. So of course, you know, the IC needs to know what particular frequency in the 406 system is being used or was detected. And if it's not, you know, the one of the first three, then you've got to have the newer road theta. But if you don't have that and they still want to send you out, then you could go to the initially reported fixed location, presuming there is one, and see if you can pick up the 1215 homing signal. Again, you might have to be lower. The ground team or the UDF team that you're communicating with, they should also be aware of this. And 100 yards is pretty close, especially at 90 knots. So be aware of that.
But like I said, we try very hard to not send the wrong aircraft.
Right.
So.
And I believe
hopefully you don't wind up in this situation.
I believe in Group 2, we have road thetas in both the aircraft. Is that correct?
They're
They're 2012 thought.
Yeah, well, certainly the 182s.
The 182s, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. 172 doesn't have one, and then A3 Echo has the Ultronics, so. I think,
Or
right?
maybe A3 Echo has a.
Or did they switch it out and put a?
I think it has a road theta.
Oh, so they switched it out and put a road theta in.
I think SoCal has the 517s. Also, maybe 468 up at Sacramento.
Okay.
Has a 517.
Well, when you're down at Bakersfield, again, you won't know which aircraft you're going to get assigned, and it might be any one of these. Right. So just be aware of that.
And I think the issue is that I was going to say that the antenna is the same.
Right.
And so you can actually just do a swap from the 517 to the 600. Right.
The practice beacons, of course, don't transmit on 406. They were using 121775, and they're higher power. They're not going to be the real low power. I guess maybe if the battery's low, maybe they might be, but in general, they're the higher power. So you won't have that problem you won't have that challenge for the exercise for but you might see it on a real mission. Okay, so here's the a picture of the Becker, what it looks like, the panel-mounted device there, and I think we're going to go through these different features, how to power it on, make sure it's in the right mode. There's different pages in the menu items. How to tune it, how to set the squelch, how to use it to DF, and then ultimately locate the ELT and or practice beacon. And if you look at the display here, you've got a sort of a volume indicator down in the lower left there. This is volume. That's an indication of relative volume level, and if you turn the volume knob, that'll go up and down. The bar on the left side that goes vertically up, that shows you with the little triangle thing what the squelch level is set at, and the dark bar inside is the strength, basically the strength of the signal. So it's showing right now it's breaking squelch. In the lower right side, you see the frequency it's tuned to, in this case 1 to 1.5. And I think this, I don't know where they make these. Is it French because they're using a comma instead of a decimal? But oh well. You can see it's on page 1, and you've got in the center. This is your relative bearing. It's telling you with the marble in the sort of the northeast quadrant of this bearing. 0, it's not really northeast. 0 is the heading of your aircraft, right? And so relative to the heading of the aircraft, it's picking up the signal 27 degrees to the right.
Right. So you might give your pilot the instruction, come right 30 degrees.
And then see where it settles out. Yeah. Works better when you're further away from the signal. As you get closer, of course, you get towards that cone of confusion, and we'll go over that too, I think. Here. Okay,
I think there's close-ups on each one of the modes.
Yeah. Oh, okay, here's the rho theta. Oh, this is a 517. Okay.
Yeah. All
right. So this one has a power on-off button in the front. It's just push it on, push it off. Some of them, I thought the way they were wired in, when you turn the avionics on, they go on. But in this case, you have a separate on-off button. Just be aware of that. I like this. Be prepared to execute the next steps. If you're not fast enough, you may need to recycle the power, turn it off and back on. Sometimes that's just the best way to deal with electronics. If all else fails, turn it off and start over. Okay. And you can see the buttons here. You've got the volume in the lower left, the squelch in the upper left, and the lower right, that's the frequency, right? And then upper right is selecting between the different pages.
Right, so the big deal here between the old one and the new one is that on the new one, you can select the frequency that you're going to use.
Right.
In the old one, you have to pick the training mode right when it gets turned on. Otherwise, it'll default to 121.5. So when you're on a SARX,
right,
you have to make sure to do this within the first 3 seconds or something.
It says with adjustable test frequency, so we'll have to see how that.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So for changing the mode here, it uses the page knob, upper right knob, only on power up. So again, if you're not in the mode you want to be, you got to cycle the power. So after you set that mode, whether you're emergency 1215 or training should be 121775, wait until it goes to the next page. And apparently it takes about 15 seconds, so don't push anything, just wait till it's done. It automatically should cycle to the next page.
Yeah, there's no enter key.
Right. Well, I guess the on-off is kind of an enter key, I suppose, just to start over. So we have different pages here. Page 1 is like the ADF, that shows you the relative bearing there. Page 2 in this particular version is the first quarter only. I've seen this before. I don't know how useful it is. If it's bouncing around a lot, it's gonna go out of range, so you won't see it. So, and then page 3
the numbers are a little bigger.
Yeah,
that's about it.
The numbers are bigger on page 3, but you don't get the sort of the visual of the marbles. So For the MPs, though, it might be easier to see the numbers, you know, especially if you have a MO who, I don't know, gets busy doing something else, you know, talking on the radio with with the ground team or with base, or you're training an MO. You might want to be able to see what they're seeing more easily. So page 3 can help doing that. Okay, so tuning is in the lower right. So this is the other version, right? This is the
This is all the 517.
Yeah, all the 517. Okay. So you want to be 1215 for an actual mission, or 121775 with practice beacons. It will support 243. Is that right? 243 77550 for practice. I thought it was higher than that. I thought it was double 121 775.
Which is 243550.
Is it? Oh, you're right. It is. Okay.
Yeah.
Do math in my head. Okay. So yeah. So you can get the military frequencies on there as well. Although I don't think any of our practice beacons can tune to that UHF frequency. I think they're all just VHF.
No.
So of course you can only select the training frequencies while you're in training mode. So remember, when you power it on, make sure you're in the right mode. And you can only select the emergency frequencies in the emergency mode. And then the Marine band has 156.8 for the EPIRBs. There's the comma comment. It's made in Europe, yes. That's why you have commas instead of decimal points. Okay, so squelch is in the upper left. So now you want to adjust the squelch. So first, you're gonna want to, well, let's see. Well, as I mentioned before, you've got the setting triangle, the little triangle. That's how you have it set. You know, so if you turn the knob, that'll move the triangle up and down. And then the ambient noise level is shown there. This, you know, what's coming in already, whether or not it's actual signal from a transmitter. So adjust the squelch knob, and you want to be listen to make sure that static, you know, that noise is not an actual signal. So when you're trying to require a signal, you're going to want to open the squelch. Now, you don't, again, we talked about this before, you may be using the airband to do that because it's more sensitive. And you know, if you unsquelch, you know, say COM2 on 1215, you're probably going to pick it up before the Becker rho theta does. In the G1000s, these are wired into the aux channel. So your MO, you might be listening on COM1 to hear what the MP is doing. You might be listening on COM3 and talking on COM3 with base, and also listening to the aux channel. So it can get pretty hectic. You do want to check that you're hearing audio, so you might need to adjust the volume to, you know, comfortable level. Okay, any questions about this? 4 knobs. It's not rocket science. It's, you know, play with it a little bit when you get in the aircraft if you haven't done so before, and try the different settings to see what they do. And when you get a chance to go out there and prosecute a practice beacon, work through the process and the techniques, and you should be able to do it fairly quickly. When I was in mission pilot school, The MO trainee that was with me had some vision problems and some hearing problems, and I ended up having to operate the Becker from the left seat. It's not easy, but it is doable. We did find the beacon, so that was good. All right, let's go on to the next page. So now we're gonna find the beacon, the practice beacon, or the ELT. So you're basically following the relative bearings. And this is key to have good communication between the MO and the MP, because honestly, from the left seat, it's really hard to see, especially in page 1 there. You can kind of see it, but the parallax, especially if the sun is shining from that side, it's going to make it hard to see what's going on there. So have good communications. That's that CRM that you're all practicing. And you're homing on it just like an ADF, or on kind of like a VOR on a particular radial, I guess. And if you do know there are strong winds, you may need to correct for those. So you may be heading directly towards it, but your heading is actually 10 degrees off one way or the other because of the winds, the crosswinds. So these are relative bearings. The nose of the aircraft is at 0 or 360, and so if you're showing 006, that's right 6 degrees. If it's 354, it's left 6 degrees, or right 354 degrees, which hopefully you're not going to do. Relative bearing plus true heading is true bearing. Well, yeah, that kind of makes sense, right? If your heading is north and you've got it relative bearing of 5 degrees, then you got to turn 0 plus 5 degrees, turn to 5, right? Or if it's south 180 and relative bearing is 20 degrees to the left, and subtract 20 degrees, and your new heading would be 160. Of course, we don't really use true in the aircraft. We use magnetic, so let's stick with that. Yeah, that's exactly what it says there in the last bullet. So add right, subtract left, or turn right, turn left. Any questions about that? Now that number isn't going to be a static number. It's going to jump around. It's going to say, it might be, you know, especially if you're fairly far away, it might be, you know, oh, it's 005 to 007 and jumping around. And then as you get closer, it might oscillate between, you know, say if you're heading straight toward, it might oscillate between like 355 and 005. And the closer you get, the more it's going to oscillate as you get closer to that cone of confusion. Okay, go next. Okay, the marbles. What about the marbles? Well, there's 3 of them. There's a dark one and there's 2 clear ones on either side of it. So the clear ones indicate when the Becker first and last receives the ELT signal, and they give you an indication of how coherent your solution is. So they jump around a lot if you don't have a good DF. If they don't jump a lot and they're kind of close together, it means you have a pretty good DF. So if you reduce to static, you'll see them jump all over the place. Is there a way to mark station passage on the G1000 MFD? Yes, absolutely. How about push the range button? This, Jordan, you're going to go over this tomorrow, right? Or is that more in the G1000 class?
Sure, I think that's in the G1000 class.
Yeah, yeah. yeah, push the range button and you'll get the location. And then you can create a user waypoint there if you want.
Yeah, if you hit range and then hit enter,
yeah,
that'll dump you into making a new waypoint at that position. Or when you hit the range button, it'll display the position in the upper right corner of the MFD, and you could write it down.
Yep.
And Noel wants to make a point about this.
No, I'm just working on my paper here, and I just saw the chat. You guys answered it
okay
very well. You know, range button, write down your lat long on the MFD.
Yeah. Although when you're marking passage with using this a G1000, you can mark passage for, so basically every crossing you do. So if you do 3 or 4 crossings, and so you'll get several user waypoints, hopefully closely clustered together, and pretty darn sure if you did it right that signal is emanating from the middle of that little circle. So
yeah, and I think if you understand there's a delay, then you're able to better find the position.
Right. Well, if you're coming from different directions and you have a pretty consistent delay in each direction, then you should your point should encircle the ultimate location.
Yeah, if you can keep that all straight, if you make 5 waypoints, if you know which one was on which pass, that would be good.
Yep. Okay, and then that dark marble, it should be fairly stable because it's doing this. There's some software behind it to average the signal, so it should be fairly stable. If you're getting a good signal, it could jump around too, or as you get close to the transmitter, in that cone of confusion again, it'll start to move. Next. All right, so after flying over the ELT, you should get a station passage indication. What is the station passage indication? Well, as you're flying over, it'll start to move, especially the dark marble will start to move quite a bit. And as it passes through either 090 or 270, that should be an indication of station passage. So now you're going to want to turn around and re-DF to locate the target, similar to how we discussed before, from a different direction. Yeah, you could do it from 180 degrees, but do a clover leaf and do it from 30 degrees off, like in a sector search. If you want to keep the signal at 090 or 270, you can actually turn around the point using the DF. We've done this before too, which is kind of fun because you can put the MO's eyes on the target itself pretty clearly by doing that. It would be 090 to put the MO's eyes on the target. If you have a scanner in the back seat, you might go the other direction, turn left. Okay. What happens when we have more than one transmitter? Okay. This can be a challenge. So in this case, let's see, pilot 1 is getting close, but starts to follow, transmitter 1 is a little stronger, so it starts to follow there and makes a turn to 20 degrees to the left and goes there. Okay, so it's going to find transmitter 1 because the signal strength should overwhelm the signal from transmitter 2. But what if you're right smack dab in the middle? How do you know? It's probably going to bounce around. You're going to have even the black marble bouncing around. Well, maybe that's an indication that you have 2 signals. What are some things you could do? We talked about the sweeps not being, you know, exactly overlaid. So maybe listening to it orally, you know, even on the airband radio, and verifying, yes, indeed, we have two signals. If you're the clear modules especially will swing very wide when you're in the middle between two signals. So.
I think the biggest thing to do here is to get out of this situation.
Right.
Break off, go in a different direction, fly 3 miles in the other direction, come back at it from a different position. There's only one place where you're going to be directly between the two of them. That's the place.
Yeah, there'll be one line, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but you'll have one be stronger than the other.
No,
right? There's really only one place. The pilot 2 is about to hit it.
Yeah, and then if pilot 2 stays equidistant between the two transmitters, then you're going to have that problem.
Yeah. So try to avoid that place. Go right. Go 4 miles to the left, and then you'll be able to track.
You'll pick up one versus the other. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Some differences going to the newer growth theta. There's actually a version number associated with it, which you see on Power Up. The way you select the frequency is a little different. There is a video. Can we post that in the chat?
Yeah, I think so.
And there's also, you can download the manual. So that's another thing to look at in advance if so desired. But other than that, it's basically the same. Same buttons, same knobs rather.
Well, there's some things change about, like there's a whole memory page that's not available in the older one.
Yeah, but you're not going to use that. So.
Well, it can be useful for if you don't have a practice beacon to work with and you want to DF ATIS or something. You can go to the memory page and select one of the memory slots and program in whatever frequency you want.
Can you do that while it's installed, or do you need external equipment?
No, you can do it directly from the keypad.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that.
You can sort of see in this display, there's a bunch of small tick lines at the bottom. And I think the first 5, gosh, I'm just making this up. The first 5 are hardwired, and there are things like 121.5 and 121.775 and 156.8 and 243. The middle 6, I believe, are the ones that you can program directly to anything in the airband. And then I think the other 7, see, this is where I thought it was 7. I think there's 7 channels
for 406
for the 406 stuff.
Okay.
But basically, from here, you need to change to the memory page. So you turn the knob in the upper right corner, and then I think you use volume at that point to change which one
change the frequency
you're doing, and then you do the lower right-hand corner to change the frequency.
Hmm.
So it's a little trickier. The video is pretty good on it. The manual is good on it. Again, it's the kind of thing that you could do while plugged into ground power, on meeting night. If you're at a squadron that has an aircraft, you don't even necessarily have to be in the air to do it. And you can dial in any of those frequencies, and so you could listen to ground, you could listen to ATIS, you could listen to a busy sector. You can't tune in anything outside of the airband, though, I think.
Well, yeah, I would think it's. I mean, the frequency bands that it operates in are not unlimited, so.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. So. Okay, well, were you
Yeah,
able
let's-
to copy those?
I wasn't, but I will.
Okay. All right. Okay, so some conclusions here. Supposedly not as sensitive as the Ltronics DF, so you need to be closer to the LT to get the initial signal. Although, recommend highly use airband unsquelched to pick it up first and report that even before the Becker picks it up or the Rho Theta. It's not instantaneous, so because there's the averaging function, so there's a little bit of a delay in there. So be aware of that. But you know, if you're coming at it from different directions, it should all average out. I'm not sure, you know, if you're familiar with ADF type or RMI, it's not the same, but the arrow indicates left or right, not how much. But the same is true as the page 2 display. But the relative bearing is shown in the numbers there.
Let's go back to that.
Yeah, go back to that. Yeah.
Just to give that example.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So
the arrows on the next to the bearing displayed in the center, the arrows are not bigger or smaller. You just have to read the number.
Yeah, just go by the number. And you can also, you know, look at the dark marble. It should be the same, right? It's basically almost at 0. It's 002 degrees to the right. So, or in page 2, it's almost at 0. It's a couple degrees to the left. And then, you know, if you look the difference between page 1 and page 2, the 3 marbles are closer together in page 1. So it's, at least in this instant, it's a better solution, I guess. In page 2, they're a little further apart. So maybe it's not as good as a solution.
I think that's what that's really telling you, since it's the start and the end of the reception.
Right.
When the clear marbles are closer together, you're closer to the target.
You're closer to it, yeah.
So in a perfect world, what happens is you start with the clear marbles wide and the dark marble at 0, and the clear marbles come together. And when they get to the dark marble, then it's going to flip.
But in practice, they move around a lot.
In practice, they move around, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, nothing's ever static.
Right. Does that make sense to everybody? Oh, we got a question there. Shadar.
Yeah. Sorry if I missed it, but is there a maneuver, maybe just a 360 that's to be done, recommended to be done, to do a quote unquote calibration of this equipment before it starts to pick up, or as soon as it starts to pick up the signal, or does it not require any of that?
It's self-calibrating?
Yeah, self-calibrating. There shouldn't be any calibration required. Unless you're just calibrating the crew. I mean, maybe that would be useful.
No, I mean, like, if, you know, maybe if you do a 360, then it's able to compare the signal strength all around, and then better discern where those white dots need to be, or where the black dot.
It doesn't have any memory of what it picked up. It's instantaneous or with slight delay. So it doesn't keep track of, you know, the previous recorded bearings.
It's not something that would be impacted by, you know, vibration or motion or something like that. It's all working with the RF signal strength.
Okay, it's
Yeah.
instantaneous.
Yeah. Well, with some delay because of the software that's doing the averaging, but it's not that big of a delay.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I got a question, and maybe I missed it in the beginning. So the two Beckers are able to detect the 406 signal. The first one, it's got 3 channels. The second one that's got can detect the 19. But where do we actually? Let's say it's a 406 signal we're looking after, and we don't know which channel. How do we program it? How does it scan for it?
It doesn't scan. You should be told by the IC which channel.
Right, because the satellites know what channel it's on.
Yeah. Because
And then-
the satellites are scanning for all the channels, and they will report which channel it was on. So.
And where do you put the program? Is it in the beginning
Yeah. So if you look in the lower right, you see the frequency in there, and so the lower right knob, you turn that until you get to the right frequency.
Oh, okay. So because the slides only showed 1 to 1.5, so I'm assuming that's
No,
the same, right? It's the same process.
Yeah, it goes up to 40. It goes through all the list of all the frequencies that it has programmed in it.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, and that's why we were mentioning in the row theta, you can actually program in additional frequencies. There's a procedure for doing that. So depending on which plane you get, if you get a row theta, someone may have already programmed in additional frequencies. So you just have to scroll through them.
Got it. Thank you.
And the slide that's shown here, both the first and third are showing one of the 406 frequencies displayed. You see that?
Yeah, I just saw that. I was looking at the initial slides. It was only showing either 1 to 1.5, and I was just wondering. But that makes perfect sense. Thank you.
It's just an example that they took a snapshot of. That's all. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So there are some other things on this display. There's a little section on the right that says LS, and that means last signal, and it's a timer. So when it receives a transmission on a 406 channel, the timer will start at the end of it. And so if you're waiting the 50 seconds for the next transmission, you can use that to tell whether or not
where you're getting close to it.
It's around the time again. And there's some fuzz on that as well. They don't do it exactly 50 seconds later. It's plus or minus, up to a couple of seconds in either direction. Again, to watch out for this situation where 2 of them would be in perfect sync and then interfere with each other. So sometimes it'll be 53 seconds, sometimes it'll be 50 seconds. And then the other thing that gets used for when you're on 121.5 is if it loses the signal, that timer will start counting up. And so if at some point you're flying along and it says 45 seconds on it, that means it's been 45 seconds since it actually detected a signal, and you might be very far off.
And you might be following noise. Yep, that can happen too.
Right.
So that's one of the tricks to DFing is to distinguish using the receiver between noise and real signal. So, I mean, if you can hear the signal, that's one thing. But if you're not really sure, that's what you need to do.
So you can see in this picture that it's showing the frequency that it's on, and that's the knob in the lower right corner that you use to flip through all of the ones that are in there.
Yep. We were. Oh, the conclusions.
We were here, right?
Yep.
Or the thoughts, I guess.
Oh, the thoughts. Okay.
There's a question.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I think Ilya has a question. Yep.
Yeah, I wanted to ask if the timer is not related to the sensitivity.
The timer is impacted by the squelch setting.
Right.
Right. So it's the last time
it broke squelch.
That it broke squelch.
Yeah.
On the 121.5 stuff, there is no squelch setting for the 406.
406, yeah.
The 406 is, and you either decode it or you don't.
You're either.
Does that make sense? So one thing you can do, even if there's no signal around, is if you open the squelch on 121.5, you'll see the marbles, going nuts trying to figure out where the noise is. And then when you close the squelch, the timer will start. Right? Because it has stopped getting signal. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, some just general thoughts here. Looking at that dark marble to indicate relative direction, which should correspond to the number that you're seeing there. That's useful. We talked about if you don't have a training beacon that's set up and on, you can still practice using, AWAS, ASOS, ATIS, whatever, any other continuously transmitting source that's in the frequency range. If you can tune it in, of course, there's the manual associated with that. You can DF it. Yeah, the other caution there, though, those signals are often much stronger than the power of an ELT. So it's, of course, a lot easier to DF it. Plus, you know where it is, so it doesn't. But to practice the techniques doesn't hurt.
Yeah, just as an example, the other day, we were DFing Livermore's ATIS, and you could DF it long before you could hear it. Right, before you could actually discern what the words were. With the squelch open, it didn't sound like you were listening to ATIS. It sounded like you were listening to static. But
it could be like
the black marble was dead on.
Yeah.
So because there's plenty of RF energy there for it to figure out.
Be careful with the units. Okay, so this is all about following the checklist. The checklist for the particular aircraft you're in should have the proper steps to make sure that you're protecting the equipment when you're starting up the engine. Okay, when you're shutting down, if it says avionics off, it says master off, that should cover it. If the unit is independently operated, there should be an item in the checklist for it. If there isn't, I would raise that issue, because we're all about following our checklist, right? So, but just be aware of that. Just like there's no checklist item to turn on the 12-volt power. Someone has to remind you, hey, turn on the 12-volt power. We need it to recharge something. So
I usually remember that when I get to the checklist item to turn off the 12-volt power.
Yeah, exactly. Unless somebody needed it, right? So.
Yeah. For you observers, I think a great time to do that is at the end of the cruise checklist, the first one you encounter. That's just I think that's a good time to do it. If it's not on
it's when you're suddenly a little less busy, right?
Right.
Yeah.
You're out of the pattern. You're flying straight and level. Great time to turn on the 12-volt power.
Or if you're in a cruise climb, maybe, that, especially if you're going up to, 10,000 feet, that might take a while.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions about the Becker rho theta before we move on to ground DFing?
Just off of the conversation you guys just had. So this equipment runs off of a separate 12-volt battery. Is it not the same?
No, it's hooked in. Yeah, it's hooked into the
it has its own bus.
Yeah, it just depends on the aircraft. So,
but most of them have a separate panel that's underneath the FM radio, and it's called a mission master, and it has a master on-off switch, and it usually has a couple of different circuits that are wired with the
Capt radio
circuit breakers. And so don't forget that when you're running that checklist, there's a checklist item that asks to check the circuit breakers, and the observer side has their own that need to be checked at that point.
Okay.
Or the mission pilot needs to reach across and check them. So, which
Yeah.
sometimes you have to do. So yeah.
Okay, thank you.
There's also a couple of other checklist items that are kind of like that. It's interesting. You get in that mode of, the observer's running the checklist, the pilot is, doing the call and response. But there's a couple that actually apply to you as well, and you should call them out when you're asking for them. So for instance, the seats and seat belts item, the pilot will check theirs and say check or something, and then you should check yours and also say check, good on the right, something like that. Similarly, the window in the back, that's different, right? There's a checklist item for making sure the windows are closed before takeoff. Make sure you look back at your scanner and say, how's your window? Is your window secure? Okay. So we've gotten to the point where we might have to land, right? Maybe at an airport. You get the ground teams to meet you there. You use your radio and relay GPS coordinates. Going from the scanner training, you may need to lead them there. Pick a point on the radio. Air to ground coordination skills, practice them. It's our best unique emergency services skill. Many times, however, the ELT is located at an airfield. So you get a unique opportunity to actually land and help. Make sure you're talking to the base before you land. They may want to actually extend the training to a ground team that's headed your way. You can either use a handheld radio or a handheld DF unit. It was mentioned earlier that I believe that all California Wing aircraft now have a handheld DF unit in the back. So you want to get that out and deploy it. The 12th reminder that the 121.5 homing signal is significantly weaker than the old ones. So you have to be closer, makes it more difficult to find. And as you're landing, if you've got some bandwidth, it never hurts to try to see if you can narrow down exactly what part of the field it is. You might even want to taxi the length of the ramp using the Becker before you actually park and get out and start using the handheld. Most commonly used in CAP is the little LPER, which we're going to take a look at, but the one in California Wing is actually not that. So it's worth your time to track one of those down. Maybe mention it to your ES officer as a fun activity, is to use the one from the aircraft at a meeting night, something like that. Anyway, here's the little LPER. Remember the 6 steps: receive, half, DF, center, turn, shoot. It's very similar to the single meter dash mounted one that we talked about earlier. It has an off switch, a receive, and a DF switch. You can pick the frequency that it's on, 121.5, 121.6 for when you're really close, 121.775 for when you're doing a practice beacon. Some of them have a crystal in it for 148.15. Anybody recognize that frequency? No? That's the even repeater frequency. So one thing to remember about these DF, this DF gear is it's an actual receiver, and you can listen to it. And so you could, for instance, if you had a failure of your CAP radio, you could at least listen to what the aircraft has to say on 121.5 or 121.775. If you could somehow get across the point that your CAP radio isn't working, they could transmit to you on one of those frequencies and you could hear it. You can at least get instructions to give back visual signals. Sensitivity down in the lower left-hand corner, volume in the lower right-hand corner, speaker right in the middle. Okay, so you land multiple hangars, each hangar's full of aircraft, can make it difficult. Two methods can help. This calls it signal offset. It's also called detuning. Once you're very close to these transmitters, they can have such a strong signal that it's difficult to tell by walking around whether the signal is getting stronger or weaker. And so if you change the frequency, you detune or off-tune signal offset. It's a crude way to reproduce the sensitivity knob on one of these on this DF gear, because the further away from the center frequency that you're tuned to, the less bleed over you're going to get. And so this gives you an opportunity to sort of get your sensitivity back, even though you're close. You can also take the antenna off of the radio or the DF thing. There's when you have tons of RF signal, sometimes you don't even need an antenna. It's just all around you. It gets absorbed through the connector. That can help. This last item here is something we don't do anymore. For a while there was this idea that you could put an aluminum foil sleeve over the transmitting antenna of the ELT to see if the signal strength decreases significantly. We really don't want you to touch these airplanes at all. They're not your airplane. We wouldn't really have a way to respond if somebody said, "You broke my airplane." And so the rule is no touching. Even if you think you could do this without touching it, no touching. Don't forget to use your eyes. Sometimes aircraft have a remote switch that has a light on it. All our aircraft do. So if you can't tell which of three aircraft that are parked next to each other, take a look at the panel. You might see a little red blinking light. Just because you have DF gear doesn't mean that's the only way to find an ELT. Look for obvious signs that someone's been working near the ELT. Ask the folks at the shop who are standing around wondering, what are these goofy guys doing with their antennas and vests on. Use all of your facilities to try to solve this riddle. Remember that reflected signals are generally weaker, so tuning the radio further away can help you isolate the signal. Right, as you home in on the transmitter, set it to 121.6, 121.7, keep going. As you get further away, the signal will break through the swell to become smaller and smaller. This is a very crude method of direction finding, but it works. Once you narrowed the suspect down to one or two aircraft, usually side by side, remove the radio antenna and hold it next to one of the ELT antennas. Don't actually touch the antenna, just hold it close. If you're using an airband transceiver, don't key the radio with the antenna removed. Combine these ideas. This is the part of the slide deck that gets a little iffy. So here are some places that you might find the ELTs. They're usually located near the rear of the aircraft. Single engine Cessnas are on the right side of the upper baggage area. Next time you're in a Cap aircraft, go looking for the ELT. Multi-engine Cessnas are on the left side. Pipers are in the aft fuselage. There's an access plate. Anyway, take a look around. If you have friends who have airplanes that are different than the ones that you normally fly, make a party out of it. Here's an example of a remote switch. The one on the right is the one that's most similar to the one that's in a Cap aircraft. You can see there's a little light there that when it's activated. Testing and resetting. Yeah, look for obvious signs of a disturbance. I heard a story about an ELT that was activated because a raccoon had done some damage to the tail of a plane that hadn't been flown in years. The preferred method to silence the ELT is to have the owner or someone designated by the owner turn it off and disconnect the battery. Worst, best is to just turn it off. Again, do not touch these aircraft. They are not ours. Never know what's going to happen. If you get somebody to turn it off, make sure it's off. You know, go do some more DFing around the field. If you can't find the owner, you will not build a foil tent. What you will do is call the IC. Here's another big problem these days. Some new aircraft have a ballistic parachute, which could go off at any time. And you don't want to be there when it happens. Don't, right? The number one mantra is don't become the mission. So don't turn this into a recovery operation for you. Especially if the aircraft is damaged, avoid that area. You shouldn't even be looking at this, making a foil tent, putting masking tape on somebody's new paint job. All of this is totally forbidden. Please do not touch aircraft. We used to have stickers that you could put on the window. Oh boy, the good old days, right? Do not put a sticker on someone's window. It's like, here's a sticker, and then it says, do not use a sticker. Okay, remember 60-3, Chapter 1, Cap members will not enter private property and should not do anything that could cause harm or damage to the distress beacon and or aircraft or boat. Entry to the aircraft or where the ELT is should be made by the owner or operator or law enforcement or someone who has permission to do so, maybe a mechanic, maybe an airport official, airport manager, something like that. Transmitting ELT is under the legal authority of the FCC. Federal law requires that it be deactivated as soon as possible. As soon as possible is a very interesting term. And a crashed aircraft is under the authority of the NTSB. When the Asiana 777 crashed at SFO a couple of years ago, it turned out to be a crime scene for a while, and the ELT was not silenced for 3 days, which made it very interesting almost everywhere in the Inner Bay. I know that at the Oakland Squadron, we heard that ELT loud and clear. And the battery was good enough for 3 days. They eventually turned it off, but of course we asked, you know, hey, can we go turn that off? And they said, no, of course you can't. But so beware that some of this stuff has legal implications for different agencies, not just the FAA. You do not have the authority to trespass onto private property, period, full stop. Either to gain access to the aircraft or to enter the aircraft to gain access to the LT. Some owners give FBO personnel permission. You got to ask. I landed once in the middle of the night at Marina Aircraft Airport north of Monterey, and there was nobody around. We even had to do that little trick with the radio to turn the lights on before we landed. But there was a sign that had the 24-hour number for the manager. Called the manager came out. Manager was able to figure out whose hangar the aircraft was in. Called the person who said, "Oh yeah, I was flying today." They came back the next day and turned it off. We did not go into the hangar. Again, this is the kind of thing that you wouldn't do alone. You want to talk to the IC. You want to let the IC call. You know, if you're going to involve the sheriff, something like that, let the IC call the sheriff. Don't think you're out there alone. Entry upon private property may be justified if such an act is for the purpose of saving a life. That is a very high bar. Turning off an ELT is not going to save anybody's life. Law enforcement, game wardens may be contacted. Again, aircrew should not be making these contacts. The IC would be more than happy to do it. This is more of a hint for the IC. All of my interactions with law enforcement have been superb. They are fascinated by what we're up to and what we're doing and who we are, and the fact that we're finding something that they can't hear. Usually really gets them interested. Sometimes it even leads to a recruiting opportunity. So don't forget about that. It can go up the chain, but again, the IC is going to be doing that, not you. As in a lot of things, the most important aspect is the manner in which you approach the matter. Professionalism counts. Local civil authorities are in charge. I don't know about this next bullet. AFRCC is not going to task you to do something that's outside of the boundaries of our MOUs with anybody. If you're hoping to come into one of those situations, it's not going to happen. Definitely be in contact with the IC. We've had all kinds of interesting things happen with this. One time we had one that we were pretty sure was on a boat in a marina, and the only way you could get to that marina was on a boat. And so we called the Coast Guard, and they sent over one of their little motorboats, and we had crews get on the boat and get driven over by the Coast Guard. And still, we didn't board the boat. We were able to say it's this boat, and then we were able to tell the harbor master which boat it was, and they were able to contact the boat owner, etc. So there's interesting things that can happen. None of them are going to happen on your own volition. Let's just say that. Any questions?